Salute, my Quick Classics friends. Welcome to another episode of Quick Classics. Um, on this Wednesday, September the 29th, 2021. If you like the content, do please click that like and subscribe and share. It does help the channel grow. And I thought today we'd take a look at stop making some historical parallels with current events and maybe have a little fun and look at the House of Atreus, since we've got a new adaptation of the Dune movie uh, coming up, the Villeneuve interpretation on October the 22nd. So I thought it would be interesting to combine some Dune stuff with classic stuff on Quick Classics. Now, I did make a Beyond Dune video, a couple of Beyond Dune videos about House Atreides, but we're going to look more into the actual House of Atreus itself, where the Atreides name actually comes from, and supposedly that the Atreides line in Dune descends from. So this is going to be a lot of fun. But I just wanted to start off and dedicate this episode to my brother Wesley Burton and my father Glenn Burton, who are both huge Dune fans, and we talk about it pretty regularly. I grew up um, with not just the movies but the books as well. I'm a longtime Dune fan. So if you're a Frank Herbert Dune fan, this Quick Classics episode is for you. All right, the House of Atreus. Who was Atreus? Well, he's the um, one of the major figures in this familial line in Greek mythology, and as it turns out, Greek history. Um, the uh, the name itself is really interesting because if you look at the etymology, it begins with the Greek prefix a or alpha, which means no or not, and the verb treo, which means to tremble. So literally, it's without or trembling or not trembling. So fearless or without fear is what the familial name means. So that's kind of interesting when you look at not only characters from the Greek line, the classical and antique line, but also members of the Atreides line in the Dune universe, that they're capable of both high nobility and in fact, very low treachery. So the actual line, although Atreus is a king of Mycenae, the actual line begins with a fellow by the name of Tantalus. Um, Tantalus is a son of Zeus. Um, as a lot of these familial lines in Greek mythologies usually begin with demigods or sons of the gods, and Zeus is very often the father. The Atreides name, any reference in the classical stuff, not the Dune literature, but any reference in the classical material, the archaic material, and older, is a reference to two specific sons of Atreus, namely Agamemnon and Menelaus, and those will be names that you're probably familiar with from the Iliad. Agamemnon being the king of Mycenae and the leader of the Achaean Confederation, and Menelaus being the king of Sparta. Um, so collectively, though, and phonetically similar, all the descendants of Atreus are referred to as the Atreidai, with the plural alpha iota at the end, or AE in Latin. So some rather interesting characters. Like I said, this line technically begins with Tantalus. Tantalus is an interesting figure because well, long story short, he thinks he can teach the gods a lesson um, about human sacrifice, and tricks a couple of them into actually eating human flesh. But they punish him and send him into the underworld, and his punishment is and this would be Tartarus. His punishment would be to basically be forever reaching for a piece of fruit on a branch of a tree that was constantly out of his reach, no matter how much he would stretch forward. And in fact, that's where we get the word in English tantalizing. Comes from the name Tantalus. Now the line continues through Pelops, and then of course Pelops was the father of Atreus, and as I pointed out, Atreus was the father of Agamemnon and Menelaus. Um, Agamemnon marries Clytemnestra, and of course, we all know that Menelaus marries Helen of Troy in a sort of political marriage gone awry. Um, now, this is where it gets kind of interesting, I think, because before Agamemnon leaves to lead the Trojan expedition, or excuse me, the Mycenaean expedition to Troy, he he's hunting and he kills a deer in the sacred grove of Artemis and has to make amends for that. And it was she considered it so severe an offense that um, Agamemnon ends up sacrificing his daughter, killing his daughter in sacrifice, Iphigenia, who had actually been promised to Achilles in a political marriage. So that just contributed to the tension between Agamemnon and Achilles all the more. But suffice to say, when he leaves and Clytemnestra finds out after he's gone, she has an affair with this other guy. And upon Agamemnon's arrival, um, long story short, she ends up stabbing him. But the line of Orestes, or excuse me, the line of Agamemnon doesn't end there. The line of Atreus doesn't end because they had a son, Orestes, and he's completely torn over all of this. His mother killing his father. He feels this compulsion to avenge his father, and so he prays to Apollo. Apollo tells him, "Well, you got to kill your mother." And so he's this huge existential crisis that he's facing, and he does end up doing it. He avenges his father by killing his mother, and this only sends him into a torrent of self-loathing and questioning, and he wanders and wanders the land for years and years. But uh, there are some very interesting things, that can be teased out of that. Now, there's some classical references by Plato and Roman poets like Virgil, but I think the most interesting historical grounding for Atreus actually comes from Hittite records from the 15th and 14th century BC. This is really cool stuff because it's the same cache of documents that actually confirm a lot of the personalities and players in the Iliad. These Hittite records, they account for cities or regions like Ilios, the city of Troy, Priam, and they mentioned Agamemnon and the Achaeans or the Achaeans. Um, so some really interesting historical textual stuff. In the case of Atreus, there is a pronouncement basically called the Indictment of Matawata, in which several battles between the Greeks, the Mycenaean Greeks, and the Hittites that occurred before the Trojan War, which was also a historical event, during this time, the 15th and 14th centuries BC, uh, there's a mention of Artisaya. Now, scholars think that this is a Hittite rendering of a Greek name, in this case, Atreus, because he is described as the leader of these earlier Greeks, and he is also, it's rendered, the group that he's the leader of is rendered as Ahiawans, the Hittite rendering of Achaeans. So it's pretty interesting because this is where the line of Agamemnon's ancestors, it predates him. So if you look at the Trojan War as something happening in the 13th or 12th century BC, then the timelines start to line up. So there's some definite historical grounding in the story of the line of Atreus. Now, in terms of comparison with um, the Dune material, spoiler alert. There's some definite Machiavellian stuff that's going on in the line of Atreus that parallels the House Atreides in Dune, and they're both capable of members are capable of both great nobility and also savage treachery at the same time. And if you know anything about Paul in the sequels, you know that he wasn't a really good guy. We sort of empathize with him as the protagonist in Dune because of his situation, but he, again, spoiler alert, he ends up unleashing a jihad on the universe that ends up killing billions of people, and likewise his son Leto II, who was known as the God Emperor of Dune, was a tyrant. Um, so that treacherous element is there. Now, I should say that um, Paul reminds me most, I think, of Orestes because of the great existential issues at stake during his life. And like Orestes, Paul avenges his father, not against his mother, but against the Harkonnens. Um, and just because of the person he's becoming and his prescient powers and all the politics of the universe at the time, it does sort of resemble the crisis of the Greek house of Orestes, or excuse me, the house of Atreus. Um, and interestingly enough, the the battle, the war that takes place between the Atreides and the Fremen on the one hand, and the Emperor and the Harkonnens on the other hand, for basically hegemonic control over Arrakis for the spice, is eerily similar to what happens with the Trojan War. Less so about this botched marriage with Helen, but more so about the control of the economics of the Aegean uh, in the wake of the demise of the Minoan Empire, who had controlled it previously. And so now you have the Mycenaeans and the Hittites, people living on the coast of western Anatolia, vying for power, vying for control over shipping lanes and all the economy and commerce in the Aegean. So some real similarities there, I think, and again, it's fun to tease out these historical similarities. That's why I wanted to talk a little bit about the House of Atreus. So leave some comments. Let me know what you think. If you want to learn more about the ancient Greeks, I do give a certification in Mediterranean civilization, and you can purchase that this week. The next session starts next week on the 3rd, and the sale price is $115 for all 12 of those courses. You can email me at professorburton at Yahweh, or excuse me, professorburton at yahoo.com to take advantage of that. So there's some things about the House of Atreus and the Dune universe to consider. And everybody have a good evening. I'll talk to you later.